Hello, myself Rajendra V. Patil. I am working as an associate professor in the Department of ENTC, Godavari College of Engineering. This college is affiliated to North, Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar Technological University, Lone. Now, I am going to discuss about the journey of processor. Now, you are aware that microprocessor is one of the part of the processor. Now, the question arises, what is microprocessor? As its name indicates, from the behalf of nomenclature, micro means very small, and processor means it will create certain process, it will develop certain process, it will work out on the different tasks on behalf of the process. Now, as far as microprocessor is concerned, this is this is the definition on behalf of nomenclature. Now we'll discuss the definition as far as technical concern. Microprocessor, alternative name of the microprocessor is CPU or logic chip. In computer, it works like a brain by incorporating the function of single integrated circuit or a central processing unit. It is a programmable device used for the multi-purpose. Now, what type of multi-purpose it will work out? So it will add certain numbers, it will add certain text, it will subtract, multiply, arrange certain string, find out the biggest number, smallest number, such type of number of tasks we can perform by means of microprocessor. Now the data processing is the processor. Data processing in the processor can be done with the arithmetic logic unit, control unit, and register array. We are aware that microprocessor contains three parts. One is controlling unit, another is memory, and third one is your register arrays. Okay, the array register processes the data through the number of registers that execute like momentarily quick access memory position. The flow of data and the instruction in the system can be handled through the control unit. So control unit works to controlling all the activities. Okay, then we'll discuss about the next part, that is history of the microprocessor. Our focus is on behalf of history of the microprocessor. Microprocessor is a single IC package in which several useful functions are integrated and fabricated on a single silicon semiconductor chip. Its architecture consists of central processing unit, memory module, a system bus, and input-output unit. The central processing unit consists of one or more arithmetic logic units, registers, and control unit. The ALU computers all arithmetic as well as logic operation on the data and specifies the size of microprocessor like 16-bit or 32-bit. The memory unit holds the program as well as the data, and it divided into the processor, primary and secondary memory. The input and output unit interfaces the I/O peripheral devices to the microprocessor for accepting and sending the information. Now we'll discuss about the history of processor. You are aware that the first microprocessor was developed in 4004. In 1975, the alternator processor, which are being established as a name Intel 8080. Now, in 1980, IBM decided to utilize the Intel 8088. The processor was first mass generated PC. After some years, the electronic magazine has published an article in the year 1975 on the alter which was used the new processor namely as Intel 8080. This is second generation of the microprocessor. In the year 1980, the IBM decided to utilize an Intel microprocessor known as 8088. This processor was first mass-generated PC, which was aptly known as the PC. When the people started to utilize the personal computers for different purposes like creating graphics, processing word, the number of processing within the box grew bigger. However, the processor remains the center of attention giving nowadays. Now we'll discuss about the generation of the microprocessor history. The first generation, this was the period from 1971 to 1973 for the microprocessor history. In early 1971, Intel created the first microprocessor 4004 that would run at the clock speed of 740 kilohertz. During this period, the other microprocessor in the market, including Rockwell, International PPS4, Intel 8008, and National Semiconductor IMP16 were in use, but all these were not in TTL compatible processor. Now, in the case of second generation, this was the period from 1973 to 1978, in which very effective 8-bit microprocessors were implemented like Motorola 6800 and 6801, Intel 8085, Jalgaon Z80, which were among the most popular ones. Owing to their super fast speed, they were costly as they were based on the NMOS technology fabrication. Then third generation, during this period, 16-bit processors were created and designed using HMOS. HMOS means hybrid MOS-filled semiconductor technology. From 1979 to 1980, Intel has go for 8086, 80186, 80286, and Motorola 68000 and 68010 were developed. The speed of those processors were 4 times better than that of a second generation processor. Now, in the case of fourth generation, from 1981 to 1995, this generation developed 32-bit microprocessor by using HMOS, HCMOS fabrication. Intel 80386 and Motorola 68020 or 68030 were popularly processors. In the case of fifth generation, which is start from 1995 until now, this generation has bringing out high performance, high speed processor that makes use of 64-bit processors. Such processors include Pentium, Celeron, Dual, and quad-core processors. Thus, the microprocessor has evolved. Though all these generations and the fifth generation microprocessor represent an advancement in the specifications. Therefore, some of the processors were the fifth generation of the processor, with which their specifications are briefly explained below. Means in the next slide, we are going to discuss the Intel processor, Intel Celeron. Intel Celeron is introduced in April 1998. It refers the range of Intel's 86 CPU for value personal computers. It is based on Pentium 2 and can run all in IA32 computer programs. From year 2000 up to now, here is a brief microprocessor history we are discussed in this tabulator form. In year 2000, marketed the introduction of the following processors. First of all, January 4, Intel Celeron processor, which is having 533 megahertz frequency. Then in February 14, mobile Intel Celeron processor, which is having frequency of 450 to 500 megahertz. In June 19, low voltage mobile Intel Celeron processor 500 megahertz. In year 2001, mark as the introduction of the following processors. Just like in January 3, Intel Celeron processor, which is having a frequency of 800 megahertz. October 2nd, on the same year, Intel Celeron processor, which is having a frequency of 1.2 gigahertz. The next year, in 2002, marketed the next processors as January 3, 2002, Intel Celeron processor having a frequency 1.30 gigahertz. In November 20, Intel Celeron processor was developed, which is having a frequency in the range of 2.10 to 2.20 gigahertz. In the next year, or better to say the same year, January 14, mobile Intel Celeron processors are developed, which is having 2 gigahertz. Simultaneously, low voltage mobile Celeron processor has been developed by the Intel with frequency of 866 megahertz. In November 12, mobile Intel Celeron processor having a frequency 2.50 gigahertz are kept in market. Then ultra low voltage mobile Intel Celeron processor having a frequency of 800 megahertz was developed. In year 2004 to 7, in the case of January 4, 2004, Intel Celeron M processor 320 and 310 having a frequency of 1.3, 1.2 megahertz, 2 gigahertz. In July 2004, Intel Celeron M processor ultra low voltage 353 was developed with a frequency of 900 megahertz. March, Intel Celeron M processor 430, 450, which is having a frequency 1.73 to 2 gigahertz. In November 23, Intel Celeron D processor 345 having a frequency of 3.06 gigahertz. In 2008, January 2008, Celeron Core 2 Duo processor is being developed. In March 2008, the Core 2 quad processor like Q9300, the Core 2 quad processor like Q9450 was released by the Intel. In 2nd March of 2008, the Core 2 Duo processor like E4700 was released by the Intel. In April 2008, the first Atom series processor was released by the Intel like Z5 double cross series. There is a single core processor through 200 megahertz GPU. The Core 2 Duo processor like E7200 was released in April 20 of 2008 by the Intel. The Core 2 Duo processor like E73000 was released in April 10, 2008 by Intel. Several Core 2 Duo quad processors like Q8200, Q9400, Q9650 were released by the Intel in August 2008. Core 2 Duo processors like E7400 was released by the Intel on 19th October 2008. The desktop processors on the first Core i7 like i7 920, 7 i7 940, i7 965 were released in the November 2008 by Intel. The Core 2 Duo processor like E750 was released by Intel on January 18, 2009. Core 2 quad processor like Q8400 was released by the Intel in April 2009. Core 2 Duo processor like E7600 was released on 31st May 2009 by Intel. The first Core i7 mobile processor like i7 720QM was released in the September 2009 by Intel. The first Core i5 desktop processor including 4 cores like the i5 750 on September 8, 2009 was released by the Intel. The Core 2 quad processor like Q9500 was released by the Intel in January 2010. The first Core i5 mobile processor like i5 430M and i5 520E were released in the year 2010 by the Intel. The first i5 core Core i5 desktop processor like i5-650 was released by the Intel in January 2010. The first Core i3 desktop processor like i3-530 were released by Intel on January 7 of 2010. The first Core i3 desktop processor like i3-530, i3-540 was released in January 7. Then Core i7 desktop processor including 6 cores like i3-970 was released in July 2010. January in the next year, January 11, the 7 new Core i5 processors including 4 cores like i5 2 cross series were released. The first desktop Core i9 processor like i9-7900 Cross was released in July 2017. The first desktop processor including 14 cores like Core i9-7940 Cross was released in September 2017. The first desktop processor including 16 cores like like the Core i9-7960 Cross was released in September 17. In the same time, 18 cores like Core i9-7980 Cross, that series is also established by the Intel. The first Core i9 mobile processor like i9-8950HK was released in April 2008. Now we will discuss about the next slide, which is related with the Motorola microprocessor. Now, in the case of Motorola, the Motorola 6800 microprocessor was released in the year 1974. 68000 microprocessor was released in 1979. 68020, that processor was released in 1984. 68030 microprocessor was released in the year 87. 68040 that was released in 1991. Motorola microprocessor MC68HC805 was released in the year 1993. The Motorola Power PC 603 PC604 microprocessor was released in the year 1994. The Motorola Power PC 620 microprocessor was released in the same year. Now we'll discuss about the Pentium processor. In the case of Pentium processor, Pentium was introduced in the March 2, 1993. Pentium succeeds the Intel 486. The 4 indicates the fourth generation of the micro architecture in the history of microprocessor. Now we'll discuss these things in the next part of my session. So thank you very much. I'll stop